All right, good evening. Welcome, everyone. This is the second in our series with Dr. Lauren Fullmer, who is our middle school math teacher and our math curriculum chair. And she's been giving families an overview of the Willow School curriculum and how it articulates across the grades. And was very happy and well-informed after joining Lauren's presentation for our preschool and kindergarten. And tonight she's going to be talking a little bit about our curriculum in grades 1 through 5. And for those of you that don't know Lauren, Lauren is new to Willow, but she's incredibly experienced. She's got over 12 years teaching and mostly at the elementary school level across pretty much all the different grades. She'd been teaching 5th grade before coming over to Willow. She's also a professor as an adjunct, I believe, at St. Elizabeth's. And what's the other, Lauren? Remind me.
At Rutgers and University of Dayton. So.
Very cool. And she actually teaches new teachers about curriculum and instruction. And she's just been a wealth of knowledge and an incredible addition to our faculty. So thank you, Lauren, for presenting tonight.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this evening. I know it's tough in the middle of the week, late at night. There's many things you'd want to be doing, but I really do appreciate you coming. And I'm really just thrilled to be a member of the Willow faculty as Francisco had mentioned, the math curriculum chair and the middle school math teacher. It's really just such a privilege to work with such a talented group of educators. Just to give you a little bit more background about me, math has always just been something that's been a passion of mine. So I actually, when I was in undergrad in college, pursued it as one of my majors, and I graduated with a K-12 certification in math. But over the past 13 years, I've really kind of made it my mission to grow professionally, as an educator, but specifically focusing on math, really getting a sense of what are the most effective instructional methods, using those with my students, really just trying different methods out in order to, like I said, grow professionally. I also have, as Francisco had mentioned, 6 years of experience teaching at the higher education level, and I have worked I've taught quite a few semesters at Rutgers University, where I've worked with pre-service teachers, basically teaching them how to effectively deliver math instruction with a diverse group of students. I worked with, a team of educators there at Rutgers University, and we looked mostly at cognitively guided instruction, which many of the tenets of cognitively guided instruction align quite nicely with the math program at Willow. So we'll really just take a deep dive into that this evening. And while you can certainly argue, I'm sure, that all of the content areas are important, I feel as though math plays a really crucial role in supporting students' understanding in the other content areas. It also develops their critical thinking skills, and it equips them with the skills necessary just to confidently solve problems in their everyday lives. And I think that that's so important, and try to really convey that to my students is the applicability of math in their everyday lives. And it's a subject, though, that students can get turned off to it quite early, and they can lose confidence. Math anxiety is really prevalent among students, and it can impact their willingness and their ability to learn. So that's something that we certainly want to avoid. But on the flip side, we also want to really encourage our students and fuel their motivation for those students who are quite excited about math and passionate. So while we can support students with their math learning in the classroom, we really depend on you for your support at home, which is why we're having this series, so that we can start this dialogue and provide you with the information necessary to most effectively support your students or your children at home. So we're going to cover quite a bit of ground tonight, give you an overview of Willow's math program so you can kind of see the sequence from preschool all the way to 8th grade. Obviously, tonight we're just focusing on grades 1 through 5, and we'll take a deeper dive actually into subsequent in-person presentations, where we're going to be looking at grades 1 and 2, and then grades 3, 4, and 5. So we'll get really into the nitty-gritty in those 2 sessions. We're going to also look at the 5 strands of math proficiency, which really are kind of underpinning our program at Willow. Explain how it's really a balanced math program. Yes, we have the Singapore framework, and that is the dimensions program that we use, but there are so many other components that we pay attention to as well. We'll kind of dig into the Singapore math framework. I have a short video that really conveys the essence of the program. And then talk about enrichment and remediation and how that works. So if you have a child who might need that enrichment or might need that remediation, like just making sure that we are addressing their needs and explaining the procedure for that. And then, of course, what can you do at home? I know that that's every parent's question. So I'm going to give you some quick tips tonight, but once again, going to get into that in greater detail for the specific grade bands when we do those in-person presentations, and then just giving the information and the details about that, and a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So just overall, as I'm sure you've seen, and which may attract you very much so to Willow and the fantastic program that they have, it really is student-centered, not just across the board, but specifically in math as well. So we really differentiate and almost individualize the math program for each child to meet their needs. I've gone into every single classroom and have really seen that happening, whether it's in the form of math workshop, whether it's in the form of, pulling out a small group, giving a child an extension or some sort of a challenge performance task who needs it. The amazing thing about the Singapore framework and really about our program at Willow as well is the focus on problem solving. So not looking at it as an add-on, but instead the vehicle through which we're teaching the content. And that really promotes some social emotional learning skills, which is another passion of mine and a research interest as well, in addition to just the content as well. We really focus on the process. So how did we get to the answer? Not necessarily getting the correct answer. So the process versus the product of learning. And there's this balance of the 5 strands that we'll be discussing, but 2 of which are conceptual understanding and then procedural fluency. It's interdisciplinary. So at Willow, it's fantastic. You'll see students, the kindergartners were running out and they were measuring, a tree in science and looking at the circumference then in math. And so really students don't see it as like, this is just math class, but seeing how all of it really comes together. And then last but not least, looking at the CPA approach that really is a major component of the Singapore framework. And that stands for concrete, pictorial, abstract. And I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of that. So looking at our progression from preschool all the way to 8th grade, which is what I teach. So in preschool and kindergarten, and that was the first presentation in our series, and those materials were shared out in a Friday folder by Carrie. But the focus is really in preschool and kindergarten on building students' number sense and giving the foundations, but also really promoting a positive math disposition. And we do that not with the Singapore framework, but instead through Montessori activities and a lot of play-based learning. I think it's fantastic because you go into any of those classrooms and those kids don't even know they're learning math. They're having so much fun, and they're really doing it in such a kinesthetic and just such a play-based way. We have also here, and we'll be sharing this presentation, but I've developed, as part of our curriculum here, I will share with you right now, just a quick overview, a skills inventory, and that's for the preschool and kindergartners. So we have a really solid sense of, what are the skills that these students will be exposed to and need to be successful starting in grade 1. So that is, our skills inventory that we have that really guides the learning in our pre-K and kindergarten classrooms. Then we get to grades 1 through 5, which is all what's really pertinent to all of you. And that is the Singapore Math Dimensions program, in addition to the other components of that balanced math program that I had mentioned before. So we introduced Singapore Math, and we really, really focus on problem solving as the vehicle through which the students are learning the content. So not just as an add-on, but really presenting everything through that. I mean, you'll be seeing those, number bonds and the bar models and everything, really starting in grade 1, and that carries through all the way to grade 5. But obviously the complexity and the content changes throughout. And then when we get to grades, it should say, 6 or 8, when we get to 6 or 8, it really is building on the foundations that are learned in grades 1 through 5. And we're focusing more on, things like study skills, note-taking techniques that are going to really give them the opportunity to be successful as we prepare them, moving on to high school. We are using the Dimensions math program in addition to some other resources in grades 6 or 8. And, similar to, the other grades, it is really much so individualized for each student's needs. And I can speak of that because I am the one who is implementing the instruction at that level. So I mentioned that this is really what is, the foundation of our program at Willow. And there are 5 strands of math proficiency that really are underpinning our entire program here, and which we're really striving, of course, to teach students about fractions, of course, to teach students about how to add and subtract multi-digit numbers, but ultimately it's through these 5 strands that we continue to kind of focus on when teaching that content, and making sure that we're really addressing each of these for our students to be successful. So you'll see that with conceptual understanding, that is really something that students will be missing. And for example, they might be able to apply the procedure, but not really understand why those specific steps work. That's something that's really common in the US that we do, and we tend to do with other programs, not necessarily with the Singapore framework, but give students procedures without any conceptual underpinnings. So with a problem, for example, like 100 minus 76, if I teach the students how to, borrow and, regroup and everything with the traditional algorithm for subtraction, then they might be able to apply that procedure. But what you'll soon see is that they might make errors in it because they're not necessarily understanding what it means when they're regrouping, when they're going to the tens place and taking, and they're borrowing from that place. So that's why, and I'll get to this in a little bit, we really do build that conceptual understanding through the use of concrete materials, whether it's base 10 blocks in that specific scenario, and then eventually lead to where the students can, represent that through drawing. So that's the pictorial, and then eventually get to the abstract, which would be the application of a procedure. So like the traditional algorithm. So it's really, really important to give our students and build their conceptual understanding. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of repetition. So what conceptual understanding in the research, they refer to it as integrated and a functional grasp of mathematical ideas, which really allows students to learn new ideas by connecting them to what they already know. So it's building on the existing schema that they have. And a few benefits of building conceptual understanding are that really it supports retention of those concepts that they've learned, and it prevents common errors, as I mentioned before. So then we move into the procedural fluency, and this is not necessarily in a specific order. They're all interrelated, as you could see with the picture. So the procedural fluency for that problem I mentioned, 100 minus 76, would be the ability to apply that procedure of, in that specific instance, the traditional algorithm for subtracting multi-digit numbers. So the borrowing, the regrouping, and everything. That's just one procedure that they might use. They could also use partial, they could also use in that specific instance, like being able to look at the place value rather to subtract. So that would be the skill in carrying out procedures, but flexibly. So knowing that they can kind of use different procedures depending on the specific problem, accurately and efficiently. And really it's just their flexibility with numbers. That moves into then the strategic competence. So that would be having, I always say to my students, math is like a menu, and having a variety of procedures that they could use to apply to a specific problem, but then knowing which one they would use to be most efficient in solving a particular problem. So that would be the strategic competence. So thinking about different methods to approach a problem and figure out which one is most effective. Adaptive reasoning then is really when we get into that math discourse and the capacity for, thinking logically, reflecting on how you solved a specific problem, being able to explain it and justify your math reasoning. So that is a big, big, big hole, not just, with students at this level, but across the board often in students' mathematical proficiency. So the ability to explain how and why they solved a problem like they did. So I'm sure you can think maybe your child is one of them, of a bright math student who can crunch numbers, who can, really have quite an intuition when approaching problems, but cannot for the life of them explain how they solved it and why they solved it that way. So that is a really important component. And then last but not least, the productive disposition. So that would really be how students see themselves, hopefully in a positive way as a math student. So having a positive attitude and just positive beliefs about their own mathematical abilities. So all of those taken together are really what we're focused on at Willow. Of course, like I said, teaching the content, but ultimately being able to build all of those 5 strands in our students so that they can be successful. So that leads me to how we have devised our program at Willow. So you'll see here that the Singapore framework is one component, and we'll really dig into that and take a deep dive in those subsequent 2 presentations in the series that are in person. But the Singapore framework, and we use the Dimensions program specifically, that is the CPA approach, which I will get to in another slide. The idea of teaching content through problem solving and really focusing on depth versus breadth. So the great thing about the Singapore framework and Dimensions specifically is that concepts are revisited every single year to really spiral them and then ultimately allow for mastery. Of course, they increase in their complexity as they are presented every single year. But instead of covering, 40 different topics, Dimensions likes to focus on fewer so that this way they're in allowing the students to master them at a deeper level. Formative assessment to drive instruction. So I've seen in all of the classrooms grades, PK all the way to 5, teachers are taking anecdotal notes. They're sitting with students. They're having, what we call like informal interviews, right? And getting a sense of, okay, what skills do they have that they're proficient in, and what skills are they lacking that they need to address? Being able to use that to really plan their mini lessons moving forward, and also small group work as well. That kind of leads us to the next component, differentiating to individualized instruction, which is just the awesome part of Willow and probably one of the main driving forces behind why you've chosen it for your child. And they're really getting an individualized program that suits their specific needs. So what math skills they specifically need and how they can be enriched in their learning. Emphasis on fact mastery. So that is definitely addressed throughout the Singapore framework. So that's a component of this as well. They have a heavy emphasis on mental math. So that flexibility with numbers that relates to what I mentioned earlier. But we also have other components that we focus on as well. And I will mention those on a subsequent slide. And then last but not least, everything at Willow is very intentional. So it's the purposeful practice, allowing our students to practice these skills. I mentioned before, the repetition is really necessary in many different ways. So we're really addressing the needs of a variety of diverse learners. So I wanted to share with you to take a little bit of a closer look at the Singapore Math Framework. It's about a 5 or 6 minute video, and it really will give you the highlights of the program and really hopefully give a foundation for what we're going to explore in a little bit. So bear with me while I pull this up. And
welcome. If you're just starting to learn about Singapore math or looking for a quick overview, this video will cover the basic history, approaches, and outcomes. Singapore math is a term used outside of Singapore to refer to several math programs that either originated in Singapore or programs subsequently made for the US market that follow the same method and design philosophy. The Singapore math method is a highly effective teaching approach originally developed in the 1980s for Singapore public schools. We introduced the method to the US over 20 years ago, and since then Singapore math has been widely adopted in various forms around the world. Singapore consistently ranks at the top in international math testing because the intentional progression of concepts in the Singapore math approach instill a deep understanding of mathematics. We will cover a few of the tools created or adapted by Singapore's Ministry of Education for this purpose, starting with the fact that in Singapore math, concepts are layered on each other and connected across topic areas and grades, building on each other to build a flexible and powerful understanding of math over the course of years. At the center of Singapore math is the model method, in which students learn to represent the information in a problem with a number bond, bar model, or other visualization tool in order to arrive at a method of solution. These are not only a way to generate algebraic thinking that is easier for younger students to grasp, but a powerful set of tools for building an intuitive visual understanding of how to solve for the unknown in a problem without having to write an algebraic expression. These methods and approaches are what result in the 5 outcomes of Singapore math. First, there are concepts, which strengthen mental ties for students both within and between areas of mathematics. Process refers to the need for students to be taught both how to calculate, as in the traditionalist math education mindset, and also the need to learn higher order thinking, as in the reformist mindset. Skills refers to the many interconnected ways students are taught to solve a given type of problem, leading to flexibility and creativity when approaching a new problem. Metacognition refers to how students are taught to keep track of their own mental processes and logic as they think through a problem. And finally, attitude refers to how students are taught a growth mindset in which command of mathematics is based not on innate talent, but is possible for anyone, and that math is both fun and essential. In these next sections, we'll dive into just how the unique features of Singapore math support students to achieve across these 5 areas. The Singapore math method is focused on mastery, in that the concepts within a topic being covered need to be mastered at a particular level. But it is also a spiral curriculum, in that a topic is revisited the next year and additional concepts are added, building on the foundation, deepening a student's understanding of the topic. Students do need to have the foundation in place, mastery, but the knowledge is built systematically, year by year, spiral, within a topic. Instead of relying on rote memorization, students learn to think mathematically and draw on the depth of knowledge gained in earlier material. In many US math programs, students get a worked example, then solve problems that are very closely based on that example, repeating all the same steps with different numbers. In Singapore math, students must think through concepts and apply them in new ways from the very start. Since they can't rely on simple replication, students are pushed to greater engagement and broader thinking. In many US math programs, concepts and skills are more compartmentalized within and across grade levels than in Singapore math, where a strong sense of connectivity to past learning is woven throughout. Singapore math not only helps students become more successful problem solvers, it helps them gain a sense of confidence and resourcefulness because it insists on conceptual depth. This naturally prepares students to excel in more advanced math. The CPA, or Concrete Pictorial Abstract approach, introduces concepts in a tangible way and progresses to increasing levels of abstraction. Singapore math is one of the few curricula that makes truly effective use of the concrete and pictorial stages of this approach through the use of bar models. Bar modeling helps students visualize a range of math concepts, such as fractions, ratios, and percentages. It allows them to visualize the knowns and unknowns in a given situation so that they can determine what calculations they need to use to find the unknown. Number bonds help students see the part-whole relationship between numbers and are very useful for visually showing how to decompose numbers when starting to learn mental math strategies. Finally, mental math helps students develop number sense and flexibility in thinking about numbers. We started our company because we thought everyone should have access to Singapore math, and we wanted to preserve and enhance the proven methods and techniques that define this effective teaching approach. We continue to provide the original curriculum that put Singapore math on the map, while evolving the Singapore math approach through new series to better serve today's students and educators. We hope you will explore singaporemath.com to learn more about our unique programs, and we look forward to being a partner in your students' success.
All right. So hopefully, that provided an overview for all of you who might need a little bit more familiarity with the program, and some of the research that really points to its success. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the aspects that you heard mentioned in the video, but just speaking briefly about Singapore Math at Willow and how it relates to what I talked about earlier, which are really the underlying, what we're really focused on with the program, those 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. So the fact that there's that spiraling component and that topics are revisited throughout the year, and then they're revisited every single year in greater complexity, that really serves to build deep conceptual understanding and allows for mastery, as I mentioned in the video. So another component too is that the discovery of problem solving methods. So allowing students to actually that inquiry, really allowing them to discover different methods on their own, will build their procedural fluency, because when somebody discovers something on their own, they're going to be able to know how to apply those steps much more effectively than if you tell them, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? Think if even you were to create a recipe on your own, of course, you're going to have a much more ownership over that versus if somebody were to tell you, okay, follow this recipe that you found on the internet, or that I'm going to tell you how to do. And of course, that'll build their strategic competence because they're discovering one of several methods that they could use, and are getting a sense for which numbers it might work with most effectively, what situation to apply it to. It's language-based, very, very language-based, and metacognitive, that really allows to build students' adaptive reasoning skills. And then finally, by challenging students to build on what they already know, it will allow them to build their confidence, because they're not working from nothing. They're building off of what they know, and they're saying, oh, okay, like they're able to connect the dots. And of course, they're feeling proud of themselves as mathematicians, what they can do. So that all relates to the productive disposition that we're striving for. So you'll see in this picture, this is actually a math class at Willow there, I think a 2nd grade math class. So they're using base 10 blocks in that specific picture. And so they had mentioned in the video the idea of the CPA approach, which is really, the selling point, I guess, of the Singapore math framework, and really is something that, allows for its success. So the idea is that with every type of mathematical operation or idea, students want to start with the concrete understanding of it. So they want to be using something that they can actually manipulate with their hands. So whether it's they're learning about adding 2-digit numbers in 2nd grade, that might involve regrouping, for example, they could start with base 10 blocks and be able to model a problem, for example, 18 plus 26, and they can use the base 10 blocks to get a sense of, okay, I actually have to take my ones and form a group of 10 and now trade it in, right? And that really will end the foundation to then draw a picture of that happening, right? So they could then draw squares to represent the cubes of the base 10 blocks, and then longer rectangles to represent the tens, and bigger squares, obviously, for the hundreds. And they would be able to represent that through a picture. And then eventually that leads them to be able to apply the standard algorithm of being able to just add using symbols. So the progression really allows for students to build their conceptual understanding, their procedural fluency, all of those 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. That's not just happening with, I used one particular example there, but I know even my students at the 6th grade level are learning ratios and proportions right now, and we are using bar models. And so we at the pictorial level there are using bar models to then be able to show them how, they would be able to represent that algebraically with an equation. So sometimes it doesn't happen all in one day, that CPA approach, but it is interwoven throughout all of the lessons, throughout all of the units, and our entire program at Willow. And you'll see too, there's a variety of concrete manipulatives that they could use, one of them being Montessori materials. I mentioned at the pre-K and kindergarten level, that is primarily the types of manipulatives that we use, as well as the instructional techniques. We're really fortunate at Willow that many teachers are trained in the Montessori instructional approach. And so they do carry that through, not just in pre-K and kindergarten, but some of those methods and those materials are used throughout grades 1 through 5. So that really helps with the concrete as well. At the pictorial, you'll see a lot of bar models used, not just for, adding and subtracting, but also, as I mentioned, even at the upper grades, they could be used to represent ratios. They could be used to represent, we use algebra tiles actually as a pictorial representation for expanding binomial expressions. So it can be all the way up through algebra that this progression is used. And then eventually at the abstract, that's mainly just using symbols and numbers in order to, in the form of expressions, equations, algorithms, represent a particular mathematical idea. So a little bit more of how Singapore, how it's present in our math program as well. It's inquiry-based, our math program, to promote that deep learning. So going from the think to the learn to the do, you'll see that actually written out in your students' textbook. If you see that come home, the Dimensions textbook. And it's a really intentional way of promoting, like I said, that deep learning. Students aren't just given an algorithm and expected to apply a series of steps, but instead really encouraged to discover an algorithm. And I know with me, I encourage my students, and many of the teachers at Willow do this, to really invent their own methods. We actually call that, invented algorithms, which really can be so beneficial, not just for that student, but for their peers as well. It's collaborative, students working in partnerships in small groups, as well as independently. And as I mentioned too, the use of Montessori materials are really, really helpful to promote that inquiry. We also have many ways that we promote fact mastery, not just in the mental math that's encouraged throughout the Dimensions program, but also we have, since this year, we've adopted a new program called Reflex Math that we're using, in addition to many different methods. It is a computer-based adaptive program that basically meets each student where they're at in terms of their fact mastery. So if a student has mastered with multiplication, their 6 times tables, they'll then move on to give them, different facts, 7 times tables. So it really, individualizes that instruction. But we understand that some students, might not, work as well with the computer. We certainly don't use that under grade 2 or under grade 3, rather. We use it for 3, 4, 5. So we have a variety of other methods as well, including, multi-sensory activities, games, flashcards. And then we have problem solving embedded within all of the lessons. So as I mentioned, with the bar modeling, that can be used to solve addition and subtraction at grade 2, all the way up through really complex ratios in grade 6. And it's really not, problem solving is not just, an extra lesson that is taught, but instead it's really something that students see as a part of every part of their math throughout Willow. So it really has a strong presence. So I'm just being cognizant of the time so that I do allow some time for the questions and answers. But a lot of parents will ask, what can I do at home to support my child? We will be having the opportunity in person in those 2 sessions for grades 1 and 2 and 3, 4, and 5 to really have you have the opportunity to sit in the child's seat and to try out bar models, to try out number bonds, to really get a sense of how you would solve these problems or how we're expecting, your child might approach these problems, so that then you have that experience and you can then use that when you're supporting your child at home. But beyond that, I think something that's really important that we can sometimes take for granted is setting a good example. So I was actually having this conversation with my students today in my pre-algebra class, and they were, saying, oh, I'm just not a math person. I'm just not good at math. And unfortunately, I think that we could, many people could catch themselves saying that. And when your child hears that, then they, it's kind of, they realize that it's okay for them to feel that way about themselves, or they see that you're feeling that way about yourself and that it's accepted. So we want to just make sure we're setting a good example, that we're modeling, persevering when, a problem might be difficult, that we're modeling that there are many approaches to solving a problem, not just one. So all of the things that we're striving for our student to, or our children to, become proficient in, we should be modeling as well. Really valuing the process. So it's not just getting to the correct answer. If you get there and you don't even understand why you got there, then it's really not even that valuable. It's really understanding every step that you're taking to get there, instead of just necessarily arriving at the correct answer. And so really, establishing the value with our children about that is important. Promoting math talk. I know I do this with my 3.5-year-old. I mentioned this at the pre-K and kindergarten session as well, but seizing opportunities in your everyday life to really bring in math. So if you're shopping, having your child, add up the prices, or try to just use their number sense to think about, like, would this be a reasonable amount? For sports, you might have that connection with your child. So having them see, okay, well, how many touchdowns do they need to score in order to win if this is the score? That can involve division and multiplication. If you're out traveling, so many opportunities for math exist in our everyday lives. So really just making sure that we're seizing those and having that mathematical discourse using the appropriate vocabulary. If you, have math manipulatives available in your home. So I suggest like having a location in your home, probably where your child does their homework, where you would have these things available, whether in little baskets or whatever it might be. So it can be something super simple, doesn't have to be something that you're buying from an education store, but beans, marbles, Legos, strips of paper when they're working with fractions. I have pictured at the bottom here, taking a paper plate or whatever it might be, using scraps of paper. So we're recycling. There's a lot of things that we can use in order to provide that for our students so that we can allow them to engage in that CPA approach. So the concrete is really what we're focused on there. Seizing opportunities for mental math practice. So I know with my 3.5-year-old, he has a ton of energy to burn. So sometimes I will have him, he's working on counting right now, 1 to 20. He's working on one-to-one correspondence. He's working on, comparing numbers. So I'll have him sometimes, jump up and down and count with me 15 times. I'll have him count up, count down, eventually when he gets older, counting by twos, so you can do all of those things, incorporating, physical movement for your child, just giving them a challenge in order order to compute, sitting at the dinner table. I know some families who have problems written on strips of paper, and they go around and they each pick one out. So, however it would work for you and for your family, but really, allowing for that math fact mastery in fun ways. Encourage your child to teach you. So the best way for us to learn something and really to master it at a deep level is to be a teacher and to teach it to somebody. So I encourage that with my students at the middle school level as well. So as one of the ways that they can study, I tell them, okay, well, pick something that you're really struggling with and really focus in on that, become an expert, and then teach it to one of your friends. So really the kids love having that opportunity to really put on the hat of a teacher and being able to explain it to you. There's so much value in that. Be patient. I can't emphasize that enough. Sometimes it's very easy at the end of a long day when we're doing homework and we just can't understand that bar model to want to just lose it. But really just taking a deep breath. That's where the SEL, the social emotional learning, really comes into play there. But just having that patience with your child and also with yourself. If you're not understanding it, and there's that disconnect, definitely reaching out to your child's teacher to communicate that. I usually suggest if there's that level of frustration, just kind of shutting it down and coming back to it when you're both in a mental space that's a little bit more positive. And then, like I said, communicating with your child's teacher is the most important thing to do. And I will, of course, be providing you with my contact information and, invite any of you and all of you to communicate with me as well as, another partner in, your child's math success at Willow. So just taking a look at upcoming presentations before I open it up for questions, we're going to have a presentation for grades 1 and 2, and that's going to be open to parents of current kindergarten students as well as first and second grade students, so that you can really have an understanding of the math that your child is learning as well as the methods that they're learning, so that you can help them at home. And so that it doesn't seem like when the homework comes home, it's a different language, or that you have that disconnect with your child. That's going to be in the HWNC on February 15th. It's also a Wednesday. We kept these consistently on Wednesdays so that it would be easy to remember. And that's going to be about an hour before pickup. And that will be in person and an interactive presentation, as I mentioned before. And then grades 3 through 5 will have a similar opportunity, but that will be for current second grade students, as well as third, fourth, and fifth grade students, parents, on February 22nd, so the following week, also about an hour or so before pickup in the HWNC. So I'm really looking forward to those presentations and hoping that you can join me in person, and hopefully more parents can join as well, so that you can actually get a sense of what that CPA approach looks like, how to work with these bar models, how to approach some of the more difficult, problems with your child, and really just overall support them. That's why we're here. I realized too, by the way, it skipped over enrichment and remediation. I just realized that I'd mentioned that in the beginning. So briefly, and then I'll get back to the Q&A. So I have developed a process at Willow for identifying students who need support and those who need remediation. So just kind of we are formatively assessing students to identify student strengths and weaknesses, but then teachers will communicate with me when a child is either significantly above or below grade level, and then parents would be contacted, the student would be assessed, and then a plan would be developed. So just a heads up on that, we are really trying to, across the board, make sure that we're not missing anybody, no one's falling through the cracks, and we are providing the challenge and or support that students need to be successful. So sorry about that. So any questions? And if you don't have questions now too, I mean, I know sometimes something like this, there's a lot, it's dense. You need to kind of take some time to reflect and think about it. I mean, I welcome you to, send me an email if you want to chat on the phone. I'm always available to discuss any questions you might have. Of course, your child's teacher is a great resource as well, but I'm happy to offer any, information that I have as well.